Hello and good evening. My name is Stefan Vossen, and you are here to listen to me talk about the dot theory and some of the implications that emerge from the dot theory. So, welcome to my podcast, message, log, or whatever it's called these days. And it is my pleasure to have you here thinking about science. Because ultimately, that is really what the dot theory is. If you think about it, it's the rational approach and the logic, the systematic approach towards information from which you get the better outcome. So, really, it is about knowing things, knowing, getting to know, and understanding them better, and then integrating that knowledge into a deeper understanding that makes us make better decisions. Now, of course, that sounds incredibly loose-willed, and these words are very ethereal. Again, this will come up a few times in this whole discussion, and that is simply because they're the only ones that really are appropriate. But nevertheless, we're talking about logics, and we're talking about approaches to information, which is ultimately all an equation is. It is a way of expressing symbolically the relationship of things, whether that is the relationship between force, speed, and distance, or whether that is the relationship of heat and evaporation, etc. All of those things are just about knowing relationships, and we then build equations, and then we formulate rules around those equations, which we then bundle together, and we call that science. And that is a very valid and systematic approach to understanding reality that I think, if you look at it purely objectively, the human species as a animal creature has excelled in the animal kingdom, if you look at it rationally, in our ability to achieve that level of self-awareness and self-analysis. So kudos, go humans. And the thing behind that is really that science simply cannot be stopped. It is something that you do. It is what happens when you are being, and that's where my statements of in some of the paper, uh, where that it is because that science never started to begin with. It is not a thing. It is the emergence of a thing. And simply put, one way to think about it is that we're looking at a benefit loss ratio and a risk evaluation, right? So we're looking at what is the value of a good decision. The value of a good decision is that it will give me an outcome more aligned with what I desire. So, absolutely, technically speaking, it is about my personal, my individual perspective on what the value of that outcome is. Whether that's good or bad is down to me or the group of people that I represent, so to speak. So again, logically, I then become the limiting factor in that definition. We also need to understand that relationship with the observer um, is intrinsic to the dot theory understanding, and that's really where the whole dot symbolicism comes from. It is that everything comes out of that pinpoint uh, point of projection, and mathematically speaking, that is challenging to wrap your head around. But it is perfectly feasible, and it's a fairly simple and standard approach to doing this kind of math. Back to the point of the science, because ultimately math being this language, it is only one language to express one aspect of how we describe reality. There are many other languages that do that too. And this is where you then get into the kind of meta thinking that the dot theory invites anyone who's looking to analyze a particular outcome is looking to do, is that you end up taking that differential perspective where that a different subset of data is being taken into consideration in a slightly different way, which then allows certain decisions to emerge. Now, what this all does is it leads me into this this territory of free will and consciousness, which is, of course, a phenomenal subject that has been tied into the discussion around the grand unification theory since its inception, which then neatly segues into the whole topic of free will, of course. And this is, again, where it gets very emotive for a lot of people. But in reality, both mathematically and philosophically, there are lots of conceptualizations around those things. So these are all things that are being discussed as objects in thought processes and logics across the world. And free will is one of these funny things that people sometimes confound and conflate with desire and all of those kind of things. But in reality, what I have come to conclude, understanding some of the logics behind the dot theory and all the implications that come out of it, is that free will is really about how we observe information, reality, so to speak. Not that we observe it. So that we observe it is a byproduct of, well, for starters, our biological identity and some of the evolutionary products of that. We are humans, not fish, and then we have the evolution that comes with that, which is an experiential conditioning process, of course, because your biology predisposes you to receive the world in a certain way, in a sensory way, in a neurostimulatory way. And that then creates the expectation patterns of how you're going to anticipate the next stage of reality to occur. So basically saying you you come to see the world in the way that you have been taught to see the world, and you have been taught to see the world by how you experienced it through the body that you were born into, so to speak. Now, that's where you then get into this whole, well, what is it that is getting born into this body, so to speak? Now, that is essentially an emerging quality, and that is where that, based on given information, the ability to make a particular decision over another is being made. I am joined by Rosie this evening, at least for now. And what that also means is that this whole idea of free will really, it is this this ability to choose the perspective you're going to take on the information and how you're going to think about and calculate. But you don't have the same level of control over how the calculation occurs. Now, you can gain that control by taking the perspective necessary to do that, but you can't do it at the same time, which is basically where this time differential comes in, and where that free will seems to have this ability to do the right thing for the situation. And those are just logical conclusions of the implications that are inherent to a real-world Bell inequality violation. And this paper and the logic presented within it would essentially conclusively demonstrate that that is the case by the experiment that is presented within it. What all of this means to me is that free will is relative. It is relatively, so it's not an ability. It's not a thing that one can measure my amount of free will against your amount of free will, and that there is a quantum of control there that we share, and that is somehow same. Now, there are components to free will, and one is the ability to hold a record. So in essence, in human organic terms, we would say that is about memory. And then the other is the ability to compute. And of course, we compute scientifically, for example, through processes like mathematics and logic. And what these tools essentially are doing is they're enabling us to compute vast meshes of data that are just significantly larger than the human brain could per se calculate, and that's why we develop tools and records and writing, etc., to be able to do that in a more significant way. But what it also means is that my level of free will is subject to what I can remember and what I can understand and what I can compute. And it is relatively speaking different to your free will, because that depends on what and how much you can remember and can compute. And so our free will is relative to our education, essentially, and it's also relative to what we are organically embodying. In a nutshell, if you are born a fish, you're not going to wander the earth like a land animal, no matter how much free will you put into it. And so these things are really very, very, very logical and very simple, even. Once you accept the relatively inevitable conclusion that, if proven to be correct, which really is just a matter of executing the computational processes, because the logic is solid. It's almost so logical that you wouldn't even bother to test it. But the real reason you test it is not to prove that it works, but actually to benefit patients and people. So these are all things that come out of that logic, and an understanding of free will can be, depending on how enthusiastic you want to be about these things, can be very, very, very interesting and powerful to understand the human psyche. And I say the human psyche for the simple reason that our psychologies, our process of making choices culturally, habitually, and otherwise, are all acts of choosing a computational perspective. And these things are educated and conditioned. So we are taught how to understand the world, or give meaning to the world. We're not taught how to see it. That comes with eyes and a brain. But the how, the observing, is an immersion property from nature and free will. So this is where you get into the ability to decide how much data is the right amount of data to be considered for the purpose of satisfying the individual's will. So you have this notion of a self that is looking at information and is making a decision that is going to benefit that self, or at least the making of the decision would look to benefit that self. So the free will element is a powerful component of how we develop human psychologies. And of course, from a clinical perspective, when I look at, for example, the impact of things like education, PTSD, the very fact that life is educated through trauma, it is essential that we come to understand the human relationship with trauma a lot better. And to me, the element of free will is a very important component to that, because if we can choose and we can, for example, make conscious choices about how we want to expose ourselves to stresses and strains and challenges in life, then there is the ability to set up a nice steady ramp, just like a training scheme, whether it is physical adaptation, psychological, emotive adaptation. All of these things are really about being fit for purpose and understanding how to optimize that relationship with that ramp, and how to explore the best next action that is going to lead to a beneficial health status, something that is going to do you good and going to help you make the better decision, which is ultimately what free will is looking to explore. Getting the decision that suits me, and the me in that is where the interesting psychological question lies, because that's where you then have the differentiation between the me that is a pure soul-driven individual that wants to express themselves, or an ego that has been conditioned, hurt, perhaps traumatized even, and become something that they're not really enjoy being. So with that, I close tonight's message. Thank you for your time again. I hope you enjoy the texts and readings of materials on the dot theory today was fun for me. I hope it was for you too. Good night.